So if you've ever heard anything about Writer's Workshop, you know that mini lesson is a really important part. So you're supposed to teach a 10 to 15 minute mini lesson, and it's a part of the process that prepares your students to get ready for their writing piece. So how do you actually do that in a way where students are retaining the information and they're actually using the information in their writing directly after? And that's what we're talking about in this video today, how to do an awesome writing mini lesson that helps students get the information they need to then go put this into their writing. If you're new to my channel, I'm April Smith. I am an upper elementary teacher, and I am so passionate about teaching writing, especially mini lessons, because my students don't have the attention span to go past a 10 or 15 minute direct instruction period of time. So we really focus on mini lessons in all of our subject areas, and writing is one where it's really hard to fit that into a small piece of time. So that's really what we're going to focus on in this video, and I'm going to tell you exactly how I do it. Before I get started, head to the comments and let me know, do you do mini lesson in your classroom? And if so, what do you really struggle with the most? Is it the transition time? Is it the actual lesson? Is it participation and engagement? Let me know in the comments, and we're going to talk about all of those things in this video. Before we actually get into talking about the writing mini lesson, how I plan it, and how I keep engagement high, let's look at the flow of a lesson. So this is an example of a lesson that I might do with my students. I like to do anchor charts, but you can also definitely do this digitally or over underneath a document camera. But this is a good example because the most important part of your mini lesson is that you're focusing on one key thing, and it's the same thing that your students are going to do in their writing. So whatever you're teaching is going to be the exact same organizer, same concept, same content that your students are going to do in their writing directly after your mini lesson. So in this example, we're wrapping up our body paragraphs, and I'm having my students go through and check off and label every single piece of their body paragraph that they should have done. This is actually a revision lesson that comes after our main body paragraph lesson, because at each step of the process, we want students to go back and look at their writing and make sure they've included everything that will make their writing the best piece that they can give. So in this case, we have a checklist for each body paragraph. We're looking at my own example. So this is a lower grades, I believe this one's third grade, because we have two body paragraphs here, which is great for my third graders. And we have our transitions, and we're looking for a topic sentence that states the main idea. We have that right here. A good friend is trustworthy. That's the main idea of that paragraph. We're going to mark that off. We are going to mark it off right here. We can label it. And we're going to model doing every single step for our students until we have finished doing this step by step in our own writing. And with this model, we are engaging students. They're part of the process. We'll talk a little bit about that in the second half of the video. But from here, students go directly into using the same exact organizer. So they're actually using the same exact organizer. They have a paper copy of it, and they're using that so they can check this off in their actual body paragraphs and label everything as well. So we are doing this together as a class, as a model, and then they're doing the same exact thing in their writing. That's really key when it comes to using writing mini lessons in your overall writing block. When you're planning for your mini lesson, you want to make sure you're well prepared. Although you want students to participate and you want to actively write something together or brainstorm together or plan together or whatever you're working on for that day, and you want student input, you really need to have some examples so you don't get stuck, especially if it's a topic or a skill that's really difficult for your students. At the end of this video, if you go to the link in the description, you'll see my mini lesson plan, which will help you brainstorm all the different pieces of the mini lesson that you need to have, including some engagement questions. So definitely check this out when we're done. I'm going to be working off of something that's already planned from the Simplify Writing program, which is my curriculum. So I already have everything filled out here. When it comes to planning each day, like I said, I have my examples ready to go. So this is an actual teacher's page. I have an example of what I want to draw. I am not very artistic, so a lot of times I will get help drawing something, or I'll print something out from the internet and I'll just paste that in my lesson so I have an example for students. Otherwise, it just takes so much of the mini lesson, me trying to draw something, and the kids are like playing Pictionary where they have no idea really what I'm doing, and so they're constantly trying to guess what it is. So a lot of times I will actually print it out from the internet. And then I have some examples here, and then we'll build onto this as a class. Then I also have my student organizer, so this is very important. Your students can draw this themselves if you want them to, if you want to save paper. For me, I like to save the time, so I just print out the very simple organizer. We usually don't go over one page for each day, or we also have digital versions of this as well for my students who have devices. Engagement questions are already built into our pre-made lessons, but if you're using the blank organizer, I put a section here because engagement questions are really important to plan in advance. So you need to plan in advance your engagement questions, your examples, and the student organizer you're going to use. Those are the three key things. You don't need to have a super long, fancy lesson plan with all your standards and everything like that unless it's required by your school, but those three things are going to really set you up for success. I really like to use anchor charts because not only are they great examples for students to see after we're done with them, so they have their example when they go on to their own writing, but it's a really easy way for me to come up with a quick organizer and for students to really have input, and we're really participating. And we could use our digital technology. We could use lots of different programs to show this digitally, but I like having my students really close to me, and I don't like having them on the devices because they get easily distracted. So for me, this is the most engaging option. Okay, so I told you I'm really not a good artist. So something I need to prep before I get to my mini lesson is going to be whatever anchor chart we have. If you're just using a handout underneath a document camera, or you're using something digital, that's great. You need to do the same thing. So you need to plan out the bare bone section of what you want on here. So what type of organizer it's going to be. Do not write in the examples before your students come. That's not part of your prep, because what'll happen is that they won't really be engaged or a part of the lesson. So leave the examples out, but have the basic stuff set up. So again, I really stink at drawing, so I've got this prepped in advance so I don't have to spend 10 minutes drawing in front of them while they make fun of me. I'm actually just going to take that picture that I printed out and I'm going to paste it up here. And this is what my student organizer looks like, so I want to make sure that it looks as similar as possible for my students so that they are able to easily do this in their writing. So underneath it we have several lines. Okay, that's it. If I was actually making this for my students, I would use a ruler, make them a little nicer, but really important to keep it simple. You don't want to spend too much time prepping this. So what we can do from here is we can actually take our examples, which I have pre-written here in case I don't have any examples or ideas for my students and I get stuck and I want to make sure I know what to include here. And then as we're actually doing this lesson, we can look at the picture and we can describe it. So, and I like to use a black and white one in this case because then we can kind of color it in or use our brains to decide like, okay, we don't have color here, so how can we tell people what the colors are? We know we have rocks, we know we have greenery, so what are we actually seeing when we envision this in our mind that we can't see in that picture? So it helps us really describe that. And sometimes I will shade it in as they describe it, and that way it kind of comes to life. So I will actually work on this with my students as part of our mini lesson. And this is a very quick 10 to 15 minute lesson. And then we go on to the student part where they're doing the same for their setting, for their writing. Okay, let's talk engagement. So how do you get complete buy-in from your students and participation from all of them in your mini lesson? Well, there's a few things that I've noticed from observing a lot of teachers that are done not necessarily wrong, just not optimal. So there are a few ways that you can tweak the way that you do your mini lesson to make sure you have more engagement, more buy-in, and less time where students are frustrated or just completely off task. Remember how we talked about pre-planning engagement questions? Well, that's because this is an important part of keeping all of your students engaged in your lesson. So engagement questions are meant to be answered whole group. So they're not meant for you to ask a question and for one student to raise their hand and give a suggestion. So an example of a way you could do this is have the engagement question about our setting and say, if you could imagine the exterior where we have a lot of leafy areas, what color would you, or what words would you use to describe the color? And then everyone will participate. So I'll say go, and then I'll hear green, I'll hear greenery, I'll hear lots of different interesting suggestions, but coming up with questions that every student can answer at once. I know it sounds chaotic, but I'm telling you it works, and every student is giving an answer. Because when you call on a student, so let's say you call on a student who's raising their hand, one of two things happens. Number one, they ask you when it's lunchtime or if they can use the bathroom. Or number two, they give you a really good answer, but all the rest of the students have tuned out because they're not the ones that were called on. Maybe a couple are paying attention to see what the other kid answers, but for the most part, when they're not giving their input, they're not really paying attention. So I try to build in questions where every student's participating. I could say something like, okay, do I need to put my period after this word or this word? Tell me now. And then everybody shouts out their idea, their answer. So, and then a lot of times we incorporate grammar, and that's a good way to do that as well. So you can make a lot of different engagement questions about the topic you're working on so that students are constantly participating and giving input. So let's talk about the hand raising thing. During my mini lesson, it's only 10 minutes, and I tell students, you do not raise your hand. If you have something to say or a question to ask, that's awesome. I want you to either keep it in the back of your mind, or if they have their folder with them and a pencil, I have them write it down, because of course I want to answer their questions. But unfortunately, we have very limited time. We have 10 to 15 minutes, and we want to make sure that we are giving students every example they need, every student's participating, and therefore we don't have time to answer individual questions. However, once students get to work, we can go around the room and we can answer the questions that students had. And occasionally what I would do, it really depends on what your students can handle back there. I would give Post-it notes and pencils for students to write down sometimes, but some classes can't handle things like that. Some of them I would do notebooks with. Some of them I would have them bring their whole writing folder back, and they could write notes on the front of questions they wanted to ask me. But ultimately, it really just has to do with how your students handle those types of things. If they don't do well and they get distracted and they're drawing and doodling, then a lot of times we'll just have them bring back nothing, and they'll have to remember what their question is. So you're probably wondering, if we don't bring anything back, are students going to take notes? And my answer for this is no. I do not do note taking during my writing mini lessons, and here's why. Many of my students struggle with note taking. So what happens is I have to stop between each thing we're doing so that they can copy down my example. And that might take one kid 10 seconds, and it takes another kid 2 minutes. So the problem is, not only are we wasting time, but the students who take longer are really struggling to keep up, and it's stressful for them. And if I continue on without them, they're still writing, and therefore they're not listening or participating. So instead of prioritizing notes, I'm prioritizing participation, because I know my students will learn more from that. I'm not saying students don't learn from note taking. Note taking is an important tool, but I know that when they're participating actively, they're really learning a lot from a writing lesson, and that is my priority. So if they don't have notes, how do they go on and do their own writing? And the way that they do that is the anchor chart's posted. Students are able to get up and go back and look at it closely. I encourage that. I want students to go back and look at what we did together and then go back to their writing piece, do what they need to do, come back if they have other questions. I want them to actively use that information. A lot of times when my students were doing notes, they weren't actually using them. And for a lot of students, it actually helps to get up and go somewhere from their desk just to kind of get a little break and then see what they needed to do, get a question answered from that anchor chart. And so it is very helpful. So let's address the elephant in the room, which is time. A lot of teachers don't have a full 45 minutes to do a writer's workshop, to do the mini lesson, and to give students time to actually write. So in the comments, let me know if you struggle with your schedule and trying to fit all of this in, even with a mini lesson that's short. Tell me as many details as possible. So tell me how long your writing block is, how often you teach writing. Is it incorporated with reading? And that's a struggle because then you're trying to balance it out. Tell me what your struggles are with fitting in writing and fitting those mini lessons in time-wise, because I'm going to make a video and we're going to really focus on some different examples of what you can do to fit these mini lessons in and still have student writing time. So make sure to subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up if you liked this video, and hit the bell notifications button because this will tell YouTube that you really like this topic, and that way when I create the next video, you'll get a notification and you'll be able to learn more about how to fit this into your schedule and all of the other writing tips videos I make in the future. To sum it up, a writing mini lesson is a fantastic way to keep students engaged, to do a simple teaching of one particular skill that they can then practice in their writing and fit it into a small period of time. So definitely try this out in your classroom. If you've done mini lessons before, try to make those small tweaks in the engagement section that we talked about and let me know how it goes. I'm always excited to hear about your classrooms, how these strategies are working. So let me know in the comments.